The envelope lay on the table like a planted time bomb. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, hesitant to touch it. The mailman had delivered it that morning, and my neighbor Veronica, who sometimes brought me mail, had left it on the dining room table along with a couple of advertising pamphlets and the electric bill. But this envelope was different, the creamy, heavy paper, embossed, my name in calligraphic handwriting. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Finally, I plucked up the courage to take the envelope in my hands. My 78-year-old arthritic fingers clumsily worked the flap. Inside lay a gold-embossed card. Quentin Thorne and Hazel Pratt invite you to the celebration of their marriage. The rest of the words blurred before my eyes. I put the invitation back on the table and sank heavily into the chair. My son is getting married, again, and I'm learning about it from a formal invitation, as if I'm just an old acquaintance of the family, not the groom's father. No, not just old. I looked at my age-stained hands and shifted my gaze to Edith's photograph on the mantelpiece. She was smiling from a picture taken a year before she died. 5 years had passed, and the pain hadn't gone anywhere. It had just learned to hide in the back of my mind, popping up at the most unexpected moments. "What do you say, Edith?" I asked aloud, though I had lived alone in this house for a long time. "Should I go to this wedding or not?" My wife had always been a bridge between Quentin and me. She had a way of smoothing over our conflicts, finding compromises, getting us both to make concessions. Without her, everything fell apart like a house of cards. In the last 5 years, I'd seen my son only a dozen times, and each meeting had been awkward and strained. I picked up the invitation again. The wedding was in a month at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Quentin had never been modest about what he wanted. His first wedding to Maria had been lavish, with 100 guests and a huge cake. I remember Edith and I spending almost all of our savings to help pay for that celebration. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing," Edith used to say. How wrong she was. The marriage lasted 7 years, enough to give birth to a son, Frederick, and ruin his childhood with endless quarrels and then divorce. Maria took the boy and moved to another state. I don't even know what my grandson looks like now. The last pictures I saw were taken when he was about 10 years old. He must be in his early 20s now. After the divorce, Quentin jumped from one relationship to another, never knew how to be alone. Edith always hoped he'd settle down, find a good woman to make him grow up. I wasn't so optimistic. I'd seen how he treated his women, first adoration, then control, then indifference. The same cycle, time after time. I set aside the invitation and made my way to the kitchen to put the kettle on. My house, a small one-story cottage in a quiet Shoreview neighborhood, was too big for one person, but too small for all the memories it held. This was where Edith and I had lived the last 20 years of our lives together, after I retired and she quit her job in accounting to spend more time with me. As the kettle boiled, I looked out the window at my small but well-tended garden. Edith loved flowers, especially roses. After her death, I continued to tend the garden, though my knees were no longer the same and every bend was a struggle. But it seemed to me that while her roses bloomed, a part of Edith was still here with me. I poured boiling water over the tea and returned to the table with a steaming mug. The invitation still lay there, demanding an answer. To go or not to go? Quentin had probably invited me only out of courtesy or at the insistence of his fiancée. He would hardly be pleased if I actually showed up. Our relationship has always been complicated. Quentin was a late child. Edith had him when she was already 35. I worked as a manager at a building materials warehouse, spending many hours at work trying to provide for my family. Edith was more gentle. She spoiled the boy. I thought my son should be ready for a life that was rarely easy. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe I didn't show him enough that I loved him. These questions haunted me for years, especially after Quentin began to drift apart. At first it was small things, calling less often, canceling meetings at the last minute. Then he avoided family gatherings or came for minimal time. Edith always excused him. He had work, he was stressed, he was tired. I could see the truth. He just didn't want to be with us. When Edith was diagnosed with cancer, I thought it would bring us closer together. For the first few months, Quentin did come more often, helping with medications, taking Edith to procedures when I couldn't because of my job. But the worse she got, the less he showed up. In the last weeks of her life, he came only once, for an hour, and that with obvious discomfort. At the funeral, he stood apart from me, as if we were strangers who happened to be in the same cemetery. After the funeral, we practically stopped communicating. I tried to call, but the conversations were short and perfunctory. A couple times a year, he'd stop by to check on me, but those visits were more like an inspection, a quick tour of the house, questions about my health and finances, no real talk about life or feelings. And now this invitation. Why? A sense of duty? A desire for decorum? Or maybe his new fiancée insisted. I took a sip of tea and sighed. What would Edith say? Go on, Beryl. He is your son after all. This is an important day in his life. But Edith had always been an optimist, always believing the best in people. I was a realist, and the reality was that my son didn't want to see me, and I didn't want to be where I wasn't wanted. I was about to decline the invitation when the doorbell rang. It was strange. I rarely had visitors. Sometimes my neighbor Veronica would drop by with homemade baked goods or mail, but she never rang the doorbell but knocked in an agreed-upon manner. I struggled to get up, feeling my joints aching, a sure sign of the approaching rain. When I opened the door, I saw a woman in her mid-40s with a pleasant face and brown hair gathered into a simple ponytail. "Mr. Thorne? Beryl Thorne?" she asked with a slight smile. "Yes, that's me," I answered, trying to remember if I'd seen her before. "My name is Hazel Pratt. Quentin's fiancée. May I come in? I'd like to talk to you." I was so surprised I just stepped aside, letting her in. Hazel Pratt, the woman whose name was next to my son's on the wedding invitation. She wasn't quite what I'd imagined her to be, simpler, without the gloss that Quentin usually attracted to women. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced," she said as she entered the living room. "I wanted to call, but Quentin said you didn't answer your cell phone much." "That's not exactly true," I replied, pointing to the couch. "It's just that my son rarely calls. Would you like some tea?" "Yes, I'd love some," she smiled, looking around the room. "You have a very cozy home." I retired to the kitchen to put the kettle on again and gather my thoughts. Why had Quentin's fiancée come to see me? To discuss wedding plans? I doubt it. Quentin was never interested in my opinion on such things. When I returned with 2 mugs of tea, I noticed Hazel standing by the mantelpiece looking at photographs. "Is that your wife?" she asked, pointing to a picture of Edith. "Yes, Edith. She died 5 years ago." "I'm very sorry. Quentin talked about her, said she was a wonderful woman." I was surprised. Quentin rarely talked about his mother after she died, as if he was trying to erase that part of his life. "Yes, she was the best thing that happened in my life," I replied, holding out my tea to Hazel. "So, to what do I owe the visit?" Hazel sat down on the couch, holding the mug with both hands as if warming them. "I've come to talk about the wedding. Did you get our invitation?" "I got it this morning." I nodded. "Are you coming?" There was something like hope in her eyes. I shrugged. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. Quentin and I haven't been very close lately." "I know," she said softly. "He's told me about your relationship, or rather, the lack thereof." "What did he tell you?" I asked, preparing to hear another version of the story where I was a terrible father who never supported his son. "That you were a strict man, that you always demanded a lot from him, that it was hard for you to show your feelings." She paused. But he also said that you never lied to him and always kept your word, that you taught him the value of hard work and honesty, and that his mother loved you very much. I didn't expect to hear anything positive in Quentin's stories about me. It took me by surprise. We're working on his intimacy issues in therapy, Hazel continued, seeing my surprise. Quentin isn't always good at expressing his feelings or understanding the feelings of others, but he's trying to get better. Therapy? I interjected. Quentin had always ridiculed the idea of psychological help, calling it nonsense for wimps. Yeah, we've been going together for 6 months. She took a sip of tea. I'm a nurse in pediatrics working with children, and I see a lot of adult problems come from childhood, from unresolved conflicts with parents. I don't want our marriage to start with that kind of burden. I looked at this woman and thought she didn't seem like Quentin's usual type. She seemed sincere, grounded, without the pretension that his previous women always had. I've come to personally invite you to our wedding, Mr. Thorne, Hazel said, looking me straight in the eye. It's important to me that Quentin's father be there. Family is important, even if it's imperfect. Does Quentin know you're here? I asked, already guessing the answer. She blushed slightly. Not really. I told him I was going to a friend's house. He wasn't thrilled about the idea of inviting you himself, said a formal invitation was enough. So he doesn't want me at the wedding. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. No, it wasn't, Hazel objected. He's just afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of conflict. It's easier to keep his distance, not to take risks. I chuckled. Typical Quentin, always taking the easy way out. I understand your hesitation, Hazel continued, and I won't push. But I want you to know that I'll be glad to see you there. And somewhere deep down inside, Quentin will be glad too. He's just not ready to admit it yet. I looked at this woman, so sincere in her desire to fix something that maybe couldn't be fixed. I suddenly felt sorry for her. How many disappointments awaited her in marriage to my son? I'll think about it, I said at last. I can't promise, but I'll think about it. She smiled, and there was so much warmth in that smile that for a moment I felt a prick of conscience for my cynical thoughts about her future. That's all I ask. She finished her tea and set the mug on the table. I have to go. I promised I'd be back by 6. Thanks for the tea and the conversation. I walked her to the door. She turned around on the doorstep. You know, Mr. Thorne, I believe it's never too late to start over, even if the past seems like an insurmountable burden. With those words, she walked away, leaving me in the doorway with the feeling that a hurricane had blown through my quiet, measured world. Back in the living room, I looked at the wedding invitation again. It looked different now, not like a threat, but like an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Reconciliation? Forgiveness? Or maybe an opportunity to finally close this chapter of my life? I didn't know the answer. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than bitterness and disappointment when I thought of my son. Maybe it was hope. A faint, uncertain hope. But hope, nonetheless. What do you think, Edith? I asked again, looking at my wife's picture. Should I give him another chance? In the silence of the house, I could almost hear her answer. Of course you should, Beryl. He is our son, after all. I knew I'd still have my doubts and weigh the pros and cons, but in the back of my mind, I had already made my decision. I would go to this wedding. Not for Quentin, not even for Hazel. I'm going for Edith, who never lost faith that one day my son and I would find our way back to each other. And maybe a little for myself so that I wouldn't regret the missed opportunity. The suit hung on the closet door like a mute rebuke. The old, elbow-scuffed dark blue jacket and pants that I'd worn to every significant event of the last 15 years. Edith's funeral, Frank's neighbor's anniversary. To the Christmas dinner at the nursing home Veronica had dragged me to, assuring me that I needed to get out into the world. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was a good suit, once fashionable. Edith had picked it out. She had good taste. "That color suits you, Beryl," she said. "Brings out your eyes." I only snorted at the time. What difference does it make what color a 50-year-old warehouse worker wears? But Edith had always seen more in me than I saw in myself. Now the suit looked pathetic. I tried it on in front of the mirror and cringed. The fabric glistened at the knees and elbows. The shoulders were bunching and the buttons were pulling menacingly at my belly, which had become more noticeable over the years, despite my generally lean figure. No, I'm not going to my son's wedding in this. If I'm going to be there, I want to look good. Not for Quentin's sake, but for my own. And maybe for Hazel, who somehow believed my presence would make a difference. I pulled the envelope where I kept the cash from the nightstand. An old habit that Edith had always criticized. "Beryl, it's the 21st century. Everyone uses cards and ATMs." But I didn't trust these newfangled gizmos. Money should be tangible, real. The envelope contained about $600, my inviolable reserve for a rainy day. I've been saving a little bit from each pension. Who knows what could happen? An illness, a breakdown in the house, some other misfortune. At my age, you have to be prepared for anything, but right now, that money could have served another purpose. A new suit, decent shoes, maybe even a tie. When was the last time I bought myself new clothes? Not a t-shirt at the supermarket, but a real solid piece of clothing? I think it was when Edith was alive. I sighed, tucked the money in my pocket, and headed resolutely for the door. The Midwood Shopping Center was a 20-minute drive from my house. There was a men's clothing store there that, as far as I could remember, sold things for people my age, not those fancy tight suits that would make me look like a scarecrow. My old Toyota didn't start the first time, but eventually the engine rumbled to life. I pulled out of the yard and headed towards the mall, feeling strangely excited. Like this wasn't just a clothing shopping trip, but something more, the first step towards something new. The store wasn't crowded. A young saleswoman with bright red hair pulled back into a high ponytail looked at me with a polite smile. "What can I do for you?" "I need a suit," I said, feeling awkward. "For the wedding." "Of course." Her smile grew wider. "Are you the father of the bride or groom?" "The groom," I answered, surprised at how easily she had recognized my role. "Wonderful. Let's pick something special. What size are you?" I shrugged. "I'm not sure. The last suit I bought was about 15 years ago." She didn't look surprised, just pulled out a centimeter. "Then let's measure it. It'll only take a minute." While she fussed around me with the centimeter, I looked around the store. Dozens of suits hung on the racks, black, gray, blue, even a few beige and light blue. The price tags made me wrinkle my nose. $250, $300. Some went to $400 and up. My $600 might not be enough for a full set. "You have great posture for your age," the saleswoman said, measuring the width of my shoulders. "Do you play sports?" "Gardening," I replied. "And sometimes I swim in the senior center pool." "It's noticeable," she finished her measurements. "So, I think you'll be a size 48, but you'll have to try them on." "What color do you prefer?" I wondered. Blue was my traditional choice, but maybe I should try something new. "What would you recommend?" She gave me an appraising look. "With your gray hair and tan, light gray or sandy would look good. But if you prefer the classics, dark blue or charcoal gray are also great options." "Let's try light gray," I said. "And something classic, dark." She nodded and started taking the suits off the hangers. "The fitting rooms are at the end of the hall. I'll bring you some options." Half an hour later, I was standing in front of the mirror in a light gray suit that fit me surprisingly well. I almost didn't recognize myself. A tall, thin man with a straight back, a neatly trimmed gray beard, and clear blue eyes. "Is it really me?" "It suits you very well," said the saleswoman, adjusting the lapels of his jacket. "It brings out the color of your eyes." The same words that Edith had once said. I felt a lump in my throat. "I'll take this one," I said. "Good choice. Do you need a shirt? A tie?" I nodded. Yes, a complete set. To my surprise, the total amount came to $580, almost all of my savings. But when I saw myself in my new suit with a snow-white shirt and silver-blue tie, I decided it was worth it. I would look dignified. Edith would be pleased. Walking out of the store with the bags, I felt slightly dizzy, probably from the stuffiness of the fitting room and all the unfamiliar activities. Deciding to take a break, I headed to a cafe on the first floor of the mall. It was a small place with a few tables where they served coffee and sandwiches. I sat down at a table by the window, ordered a cup of black coffee and a turkey sandwich. While I waited for my order, I looked at the customers. A young mother with a cranky toddler, a couple of teenagers staring at their phones, a few office workers hurriedly gulping down their lunch. A familiar face at a table in the corner. Lloyd Pierce, my old buddy, who we'd worked together in the warehouse for almost 20 years. He was about 10 years younger than me, but he was retired too, retired early because of heart problems. We hadn't seen each other for probably 3 years. After Edith's death, I had somehow drifted away from everyone. He noticed me too, and to my surprise, he got up and headed over to my table. "Beryl? Beryl Thorne? I can't believe it." "Lloyd," I reached out to shake his hand, but he just hugged me, patting me on the back. "It's been a long time. How are you, old man?" "I'm getting along," I said. "And how are you? Is your heart bothering you?" "Come on." He waved his hand. "They give me pills. Tell me not to be nervous. How can you not be nervous when you have children and grandchildren? Will you sit with me?" I nodded, and we moved to his table. The waitress brought my coffee and a sandwich. "What's that with you?" Lloyd nodded at my bags. "Shopping? Doesn't sound like you." "I bought a suit." I felt a little embarrassed. "For the wedding." "Oh, someone in the family getting married?" "Quentin." Lloyd whistled. "Again? How many times is this?" "The second official one," I answered. "But there were other cohabitations. Was she a good girl?" I remembered Hazel, her open face and sincere eyes. "Yes, I think so. Better than he deserved." Lloyd grinned. "Still a complicated relationship?" "You could say that. Lloyd was one of the few people who knew about my problems with my son. Not that we talked about it much, it wasn't a man's habit to discuss family matters. But once upon a time, when Quentin was a teenager and especially difficult, I could talk to Lloyd over a beer after work. "You know," Lloyd said, sipping his coffee, "I saw your boyfriend about 3 months ago. At the Blue Perch, that bar by the lake. He was with some woman, I guess this fiancée of his." "How's he doing?" "Well, outwardly he's okay. Put on weight, thinning hair, but who among us hasn't changed?" Lloyd scratched his balding head. "But you know what surprised me? He didn't recognize me, or pretended not to." "What do you mean?" "I went over to say hello. After all, I'd known him for years. And he looked at me like I was nothing, mumbled something like, 'I'm sorry, you're confusing me with someone else,' and turned away. His lady was puzzled, I could tell. I frowned. This was weird. Lloyd had been to our house when Quentin was a kid, helped with roof repairs, came over for barbecues. Quentin couldn't not remember him. "Maybe he really didn't recognize you," I suggested. "After all, it had been so many years." "Come on, Beryl." Lloyd shook his head. I called his name. "Quentin Thorne, it's you," I said. He knew exactly who I was. I shrugged, not knowing what to say back. Quentin had always been difficult. Maybe he just didn't want to bring up the past, especially with a new bride. "His lady's all right," Lloyd continued. "Nice woman. Introduced herself, apologized for him, said he was tired after work. Ha! 8 o'clock on a Friday night and he was tired from work. When you were his age, you still had the energy after a 12-hour shift to deliver wood for Jane Miller, that old lady who lived across the street from the warehouse. You remember that? I remembered. Jane was a widow, lived alone in an old house with wood heat. Me and the warehouse boys would take turns bringing her wood and chopping it. Different times, different morals, I said. It's not about the times, Beryl. Lloyd leaned closer. It's about upbringing. You know what else I heard about your Quentin? I shook my head, sensing I wasn't going to hear anything good. My nephew works for the same company he does. Meridian Auto, Parts Department. He says your son has a reputation there for going over the top. 3 years ago, he put his boss up to some kind of vendor fraud. The boss was fired and Quentin took his place. Maybe that boss was really dirty? I suggested, though deep down I knew it was unlikely. Maybe, Lloyd shrugged. But then he did the same thing to a co-worker who was up for promotion. Fabricated some kind of sexual harassment story. Guy got fired even though everyone knew it was bullshit. He's got a wife and 3 kids, never laid eyes on another woman. I felt the heaviness building up inside. It was like Quentin always finding someone to blame for his problems, always putting the blame on others. And also, Lloyd continued, clearly getting into the swing of things, my nephew says Quentin takes credit for other people's work. Young professionals do a project and he presents it to the management as his own. And he takes the cash bonuses for himself instead of sharing them with the team. I drank my coffee in silence. What could I say? That it was all a lie? But I knew my son. I knew his ability to manipulate, his selfishness, his inability to admit his mistakes. I'm sorry, old man. Lloyd put his hand on my shoulder. I didn't mean to spoil your mood. Just thought you should know. It's okay. I forced out a smile. Quentin had never been a simple man. That's true, Lloyd nodded. I remember when he was 12 and accused a neighbor boy of stealing his bike. He made such a scene. And then the bike was found in your garage, behind some boxes. He put it there himself and forgot about it. I remembered the incident. The neighbor boy, Danny, cried when his parents and other neighbors looked at him with suspicion, and Quentin didn't even apologize when the truth was revealed. Said only, "How did I know he was there? Somebody put him there." I always thought it would go away when he got older, I said quietly. That he'd grow up, start taking responsibility for his actions. Some people never grow up, Beryl, Lloyd sighed. My oldest, Carol, is like that. She calls me at 40 to ask for money because she quit her job again because of a conflict with her boss. And every time it's not her fault, it's someone who's been unfair to her. My wife gives her money secretly from me, thinking I don't know. I nodded. It's a strange comfort to know you're not the only one with a problem child. What did you tell him when he was little? Lloyd suddenly asked. I remember you were a strict father, but fair. I wondered. What did I tell Quentin? I taught him to be honest, to take responsibility for his actions, to work hard, to respect others. All the right things, Lloyd nodded. The same things I told mine. But Quentin always only saw it as criticism. He thought I was dissatisfied with him, that I demanded too much. Maybe I was. Maybe I was too strict. Nonsense, Lloyd cut him off. My father was 10 times stricter than you. He'd take his belt off for the slightest offense. So what? I grew up to be a normal person. Not perfect, of course, he grinned, but I don't blame others for my problems. I remembered Quentin yelling at me as a teenager. You never support me. You don't care about my feelings. And I stood there, confused, not understanding how my words about the importance of studying or working on myself could be interpreted as a lack of support. I don't know where I went wrong, Lloyd, I said, feeling an old ache rise up inside. I tried to be a good father. I worked. I provided for my family. I was faithful to my wife. I didn't drink. I didn't get rowdy. I thought I was setting a good example. You did, Lloyd squeezed my shoulder. But sometimes kids don't grow up the way we want them to, and it's not our fault. You did the best you could. I wasn't sure I had. There was always the feeling that I had missed something, done something wrong. Maybe I should have talked more about feelings, hug my son more, praise him more. Are you going to this wedding? Lloyd asked, sipping his coffee as it cooled. Yes, I answered. I thought I'd give him, us, another chance. That's noble of you, Lloyd shook his head. I hope he appreciates it. I could tell from his tone that he doubted it, and frankly, so do I. His fiancée came to see me, I said. Hazel asked me to come to the wedding. She seems to genuinely want things to work out between Quentin and me. She's a good woman, Lloyd nodded. I hope she knows what she's getting into. She said they're in therapy, working on his intimacy issues. Lloyd hummed. Well, maybe it's not all over yet. Although, people only change after a major upheaval. When I had my first heart attack, it was the first time I thought about how I'd live my life. I reevaluated a lot of things. I nodded. Edith's death had given me a new perspective on many things. Time was suddenly a tangible, finite resource. Anyway, Lloyd said, I'm glad you decided to go. Maybe it really is a chance to make a difference. And if it doesn't, well, at least you tried. And you'll drink free champagne, he winked. I smiled. Lloyd always knew how to lighten the mood. Thanks for telling me about Quentin, I said. I appreciate your honesty. You deserve to know the truth, he shrugged, especially before you go to that wedding. We finished our coffees, exchanged phone numbers, though I doubted I'd be calling, and said our goodbyes. Lloyd hurried off to see his grandchildren. I hurried home to try on my new suit one more time and think about what I'd heard. On the way home, I reflected on Lloyd's words. The picture he had painted was not a pretty one. Quentin didn't seem to have changed since childhood, the same manipulation, the same blame-shifting, the same desire to get what he wanted at any cost. And what to do with this knowledge? Refuse to go to the wedding? Should I warn Hazel? Or just accept that my son is the way he is and I can't change him? Edith always said, Beryl, you think too much about what might have been. Accept what is and make the best of it. Maybe she was right. Maybe I should just go to this wedding, congratulate my son and his bride, and not expect too much. At home, I tried on the suit one more time. It actually fit well. I looked, dignified. Not rich, not fancy, but dignified, like a man who'd lived a long life and wasn't ashamed of it. You'd be proud of me, Edith, I thought, looking in the mirror. She'd always wished I looked after myself more, especially after I retired. Don't turn into a typical old man in a stretchy sweater, she used to say. I carefully hung the suit back on the rack and put the new shoes next to it. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Plenty of time to think things over and prepare mentally. I didn't know what to expect from the day, but I was sure of one thing. I would hold my dignity no matter what happened. The morning of the wedding day was surprisingly clear. I woke up with the first rays of the sun, an old habit that I had not gotten rid of even after I retired. I lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the birds chirping outside the window and thinking about the day ahead. A strange feeling, a mixture of hope and anxiety, had not left me for the last few days. I rose slowly, feeling the morning stiffness in my joints, and made my way to the kitchen. Turned on the coffee maker, one of the few modern things I'd allowed myself in recent years. Edith had always brewed coffee in a turbo, but after she died, I'd decided that waking up alone was enough without having to fumble with coffee as well. As the coffee dripped into the cup, I walked over to the window. My garden was in full bloom. The roses Edith had once planted were blooming lushly. Maybe I should cut some for Hazel. Is a bouquet from my father-in-law traditional? I didn't know. Edith would have known. After breakfast, I began to get ready. I shaved thoroughly, leaving only a neatly trimmed gray beard. Showered, using a good shampoo instead of the usual cheap soap I usually used. Put on new underwear and socks, bought especially for the occasion. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like I was performing an important ritual. The new suit fit perfectly. I even felt a certain pride when I looked at myself in the mirror. Not an old man, but a solid man, I thought. Edith would be pleased. On the dresser was an envelope with a gift, a check for $2,000, a large sum for me, almost all I'd managed to save over the last few years, saving a little from each pension. I thought long and hard about what to get. Appliances? They'll probably get them from other guests. China? Edith would approve, but it's rare for the young ones to use good tableware these days. In the end, I decided money was the most practical gift. Quentin and Hazel could spend it on what they really needed. I took the envelope, mentally said goodbye to Edith while looking at her picture, and left the house. My old Toyota had been washed and even polished a bit, another item of preparation for the wedding. I didn't want to arrive at the celebration in a dirty car. The Oak Ridge Country Club was a 20-minute drive from Shoreview. I arrived a little ahead of schedule and old habit. Better to wait than be late. The club grounds were impressive. Manicured lawns, flower beds, an elegant white gazebo decorated with flowers and ribbons, apparently for the ceremony. A few uniformed men were bustling around, setting up chairs and checking some kind of equipment. I parked and sat in the car for a while, gathering my wits. Remember why you're here, I said to myself, not to rake up the past or to work things out. You're here to support your son on the big day of his life. Behave with dignity no matter what happens. Finally, I got out of the car and headed toward the main building. A young man in a suit at the entrance asked whose side I was on, the bride or groom. I'm the groom's father, I replied, and something in his gaze changed. Was it surprise? No, something else, like he'd heard of me before and not in a good way. Come in, Mr. Thorne, he said, checking the list. The ceremony will be in the garden and then the reception in the main hall. May I escort you out? I nodded and he led me across the hall to the garden, where guests were already gathering. Some turned around as I passed, and I could feel their eyes on me. I seemed to be the oldest person at this wedding. A young man led me to one of the front rows where I realized there were seats for the immediate family. A full, middle-aged woman in a bright pink dress sat next to me. Hello, she said as I sat down next to her. You must be Quentin's father. I'm Martha, Aunt Hazel. I shook her outstretched hand. Beryl Thorne, nice to meet you. Likewise, she smiled. How wonderful that you were able to come. Hazel was so worried you wouldn't be here. I was surprised. Really? Oh, yes, Martha nodded. She really wanted the whole family to get together. You know, her parents died a few years ago, so family is especially important to her. I didn't know what to say. The thought that Hazel really did consider me part of her new family was unexpectedly touching. Gradually, all the seats filled up. I noticed that there were considerably fewer guests on the groom's side than on the bride's side. A few of Quentin's colleagues whom I had seen in photos on social media, yes, I occasionally checked my son's page, though I would never admit it, a couple of distant relatives who would hardly recognize me if they didn't know I was here. The music started playing and everyone turned to the beginning of the aisle between the rows. Quentin appeared first, in a dark gray suit with a strained smile on his face. He stood at the gazebo, next to an older man who was apparently supposed to be conducting the ceremony. My son didn't look in my direction, though I was sitting close enough for him to notice me. Then the music changed, and Hazel walked down the aisle. She was in a simple but elegant white dress, carrying a bouquet of white and pink roses. She had such a genuine smile shining on her face that it was impossible not to smile back. As she passed me, she met my gaze for a moment and nodded slightly, as if thanking me for coming. The ceremony was short and traditional. They exchanged vows, then rings. Quentin looked a little nervous, but happy. Maybe I was wrong about him? Maybe he really had changed? Hazel seemed so sincere and kind. Maybe she was able to reach a part of his soul that I could never find. After the ceremony, everyone moved into the main hall for the reception. I kept to the side, unsure of where I should sit. Tables were spread out with name cards, but I didn't see my name anywhere. "Mr. Thorne!" I heard Hazel's voice and turned around. She came up to me, radiant, with a glass of champagne in her hand. "I'm so glad you came. You look wonderful." "Thank you," I smiled awkwardly. "You look wonderful too. Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you." She took my hand. "Come on, I'll show you where your seat is. You sit at the head table, of course." I was surprised. The head table? I expected to be in a corner somewhere with distant relatives or co-workers. She led me over to a long table on a dais where several people were already seated, including Quentin. He was talking to some man and didn't seem to notice our approach. "Quentin," Hazel said. "Look who's here. Your father." Quentin turned around and his expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared and his eyes turned cold. "Oh, hello," he said dryly without standing up or holding out his hand. "Hello, Quentin," I tried to speak calmly. "Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you," he replied just as dryly. "Hazel, dear, we need to greet the Robinsons. They've just arrived." "Of course," Hazel nodded, throwing him a slightly perplexed look. "Mr. Thorne, please make yourself comfortable. We'll be right back." They left, and I was left alone at the table. I sat down in the designated seat and pulled out the envelope containing the gift. I placed it in front of me, not knowing when or how best to present it. The reception went on as usual. The appetizers were served, then the main courses. Champagne flowed. Quentin and Hazel walked from table to table, chatting with the guests. They rarely came to the main table, and every time they did, Quentin found an excuse to leave as soon as he saw me. Hazel's uncle and his wife sat at the table with me, along with some other relatives of the bride. They politely inquired who I was, and upon learning that I was the groom's father, tried to keep up a conversation. But their surprise was noticeable. Apparently, Quentin rarely mentioned my existence. Time passed, and I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. Why was I here? Quentin clearly didn't want to see me. Even Hazel, for all her kindness, was too busy to give me more than a few seconds of attention. When dessert was served, I decided it was time to leave. I waited until Hazel was next to me to say goodbye and hand over the gift. "Mr. Thorne, are you leaving?" She looked upset. "But the dancing is about to begin and the toasts." "I'm not much of a dancer," I smiled, "and it seems that my presence makes Quentin tense. I don't want to ruin your day." No, please stay." She took my hand. "This is important to me. And I'm sure it is for Quentin too. It's just that he's always a little nervous in public." I doubted that was the case, but I didn't want to argue. "Okay, I'll stay a little longer. And here, this is for you." I held out an envelope to her. "Oh, thank you." She accepted it with sincere gratitude. "That's very kind of you." At that moment, there was the clinking of a glass, someone calling for attention. It was the best man, a friend of Quentin's, ready to make a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please," he said, raising his glass. "I've known Quentin for 15 years, and I can tell you I've never seen him as happy as he is with Hazel. They're the perfect couple. He's ambitious and driven, she's kind and caring. Together they'll be invincible." The guests laughed and applauded. The best man continued. "I remember Quentin telling me that he would never marry again after his first experiment." There was laughter again. "But then he met Hazel and everything changed. She showed him that true love exists, that not all women are, you know." I frowned. That wasn't a very tactful allusion to Maria, Quentin's first wife. I knew their divorce hadn't been pretty, but it wasn't fair to blame it solely on Maria. "So," the best man concluded, "here's to Quentin and Hazel, to a long and happy life together." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, though mine was just water. I didn't drink alcohol because of my medication. After the best man, toasts were made by Hazel's friend, her uncle, and a few other guests. Everyone said warm, sometimes funny, sometimes touching words. I noticed that Quentin had drunk quite a bit during this time. His movements became less coordinated and his laughter louder. Finally, the host announced, "And now the floor is given to the parents of the newlyweds. Unfortunately, Hazel's parents can't be with us today, but the groom's father, Mr. Beryl Thorne, is with us. Mr. Thorne, would you like to say a few words?" I froze. I hadn't prepared for a toast. I didn't think I'd be asked to speak. All eyes were on me, and I felt myself blush. Before I could stand up, Quentin suddenly rose abruptly, swaying. "No," he said loudly, too loudly. "No, he will not speak." There was an awkward silence in the hall. Hazel put her hand on Quentin's shoulder. "Darling," she said quietly, but her voice was clearly audible in the silence. "It's tradition. Your father—" "He's not my father," Quentin suddenly shouted, shaking off her hand. "Not in the sense that matters. This old man is a stranger here. I don't know him." Shock swept through the hall. I sat dazed, not believing my ears. Hazel turned pale. "Quentin," she whispered, "what are you saying? You're drunk." "I'm not drunk," he snapped back. "I'm telling the truth. He's never been a real father to me. Always only criticized, never supported. He didn't care about me, only work mattered." I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. This was not a grown man, but the resentful teenager he had been 20 years ago. "You know what he said to me when I got my first job?" Quentin continued, addressing all the guests. "Don't screw it up. Not congratulations, not I'm proud of you, but don't screw it up. That's the kind of father he is." I didn't remember saying that. I remembered being excited about his first job, that I gave him advice on how to make a good impression. I might have said something like, "Don't let yourself down," but not with the tone Quentin was now portraying. "And when Mom was dying," he continued, almost screaming by now, "he wouldn't even let me help. Controlled everything himself, as if only he knew what was best for her, like I wasn't her son, but some outsider." This was too much. I rose slowly. The hall fell silent. I saw the shocked faces of the guests, Hazel's pale face, my son's face contorted with rage. "Quentin," I said quietly but firmly, "you're drunk and upset. Let's not ruin your day." "My day is already ruined," he shouted out, "spoiled by the fact that you're here. Why did you come here? Who invited you?" "I invited him," Hazel said, her voice trembling. "He's your father, Quentin. He's nobody to me." Quentin pounded his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. "And I want him gone. Now." I stood, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Humiliation was burning me from the inside out. I thought about just turning around and walking away with some dignity. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Something that had been building up for years. The pain, the frustration, the anger. I slowly approached the microphone, which was still held by the host. The man looked at me questioningly, but handed the microphone over. "I wasn't going to speak today," I began, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. But it seemed like the right time to tell the truth. "Hazel," I turned to the bride, "you deserve to know who you're marrying." "Shut up." Quentin tried to snatch the microphone from me, but his friends held him back. "Don't you dare." Quentin has always been a master at rewriting history, I continued. In his version of events, he's always the victim and the others are the villains. The truth is, though, I've always tried to be a good father. I worked 60 hours a week so he could have everything he needed. I never drank. I never hit him. I never cheated on his mother. I just wanted him to grow up to be an honest and responsible man. I paused, looking at my son's shocked face. But Quentin never wanted to be responsible. He preferred to blame others for his failures. When he left his first wife, Maria, with their young son, Frederick, he said she was the one who misunderstood him, that she was too demanding. But the truth is that he cheated on her with his office secretary. A whisper swept through the hall. Hazel looked at Quentin with growing horror. "When his mother got cancer," I continued, feeling my voice shake, We set aside money for an experimental treatment overseas. Quentin offered to help organize the trip, since he had connections. We entrusted him with the money, $30,000, all of our savings. He said he put it in a special account for the treatment. But when it came time to pay, the money was gone. He invested it in some scheme, which, of course, failed. Quentin turned pale. "You're lying," he shouted. "It was a real investment. I wanted to multiply the money for my mother." "Without our permission," I replied. "Without consulting the doctors. You made the decision for us, and because of that, your mother didn't get the treatment that could have prolonged her life." Hazel pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears stood in her eyes. And even when she was dying, I felt tears come to my eyes as well. You rarely visited her, always making excuses, work, meetings, stress, and she waited for you. Every day she'd ask if you'd called, so I lied to her, told her you were busy but you'd be here soon. I lied so I wouldn't break her heart even more. There was dead silence in the hall. Quentin looked at me with hatred, but he didn't yell again. "I didn't come today to ruin your wedding," I said, turning to my son. "I came because I hoped you had changed, that Hazel was able to reach the part of you I could never find. I brought you a gift, $2,000, almost all of my savings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because no matter what, you are my son, and I will always love you." I put the microphone down on the table and looked at Hazel. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "You deserve better." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. There was such silence in the hall that I could hear every step I took. Already in the parking lot, I heard someone calling my name. Turning around, I saw Hazel running toward me in her wedding dress. "Mr. Thorne!" She stopped in front of me, panting. "Please wait." I stopped, not knowing what to expect. Rebuke? Anger? But Hazel just looked at me with a long stare that held understanding and something else I couldn't define. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Everything you said?" I nodded. Every word. She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering her strength. Then she looked at me again. "Thank you," she said, "for your honesty. I have a lot to think about." "I understand," I replied, "and I'm sorry about what happened. Today was supposed to be a happy day." She smiled weakly. "Maybe in the long run, it's for the best. The truth is always better, even if it's painful." With those words, she turned and walked back toward the auditorium, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with the feeling that something important in my life had just ended. But maybe something new was beginning. The drive home seemed endless. I was driving on autopilot, almost oblivious to the turns and traffic lights. My mind replayed the events of the wedding over and over again. Quentin's screams, the shocked faces of the guests, my own voice, unexpectedly firm and loud, revealing the truth I'd kept for years. I didn't regret what I'd said. Every word was true. But the bitterness of how it all happened left a heavy residue. This was not how I had envisioned this day. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was still hoping for reconciliation, for some turn of events that would bring my son and me closer together. Instead, a final breakup, public, painful, irrevocable. It was evening when I pulled up in front of my house. The quiet Shoreview street where I'd lived most of my life looked the same as it always had. Manicured lawns, neat houses, occasional passers-by walking their dogs. Nothing had changed in this world, although there had been a definitive breakdown in my personal world. I entered the house, took off my jacket, loosened my tie, hung the suit, my dress suit, my expensive suit, bought especially for this day, back in the closet. It was a strange sensation. It looked as immaculate as it had this morning, but it felt like it bore the invisible mark of today's events. In the living room, I sat down in my favorite chair and looked at Edith's picture. "That's it," I said aloud. "Now we've really lost it." The silence of the house pressed down on me. Normally, I appreciated it after years of working in a noisy warehouse. Silence seemed like a blessing. But today, there was something oppressive about it. I turned on the radio, an old desktop model that Edith had bought years ago. Classical music filled the room, diluting the oppressive atmosphere a little. I didn't know what to feel. On the one hand, I was relieved that I had finally expressed everything that had been accumulating for years. I'd taken off the understanding father mask I'd been wearing for so long that it had grown on my skin. On the other was bitterness at the finality of the breakup. Quentin will never forgive me for this public exposure, and I honestly wasn't sure I could forgive him for his words and actions. And then there was the worry about Hazel. What would she decide? Would she continue the marriage, now knowing the truth about her chosen one? Or would she find the strength to leave despite all the plans and promises? Either way, I ruined her wedding day. That wasn't my intention, but the result remained the fact. I sat like that, immersed in my thoughts for I don't know how long. The music changed one song after another, and I didn't even hear it, only felt it as a background, preventing me from fully immersing myself in the silence. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. Who could have come so late? My neighbor Veronica sometimes dropped by, but never this late. I walked to the door, not expecting to see Hazel on the doorstep. She stood there, still in her wedding dress, though she'd thrown a simple denim jacket on top. Her makeup was smeared like she'd been crying, her hair mussed. Hazel? I was so surprised that I just stood there, not inviting her in. "What are you—" "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "I need to talk to you." I stepped back, letting her into the house. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch, awkwardly straightening the lush skirt of her wedding dress. "Tea?" I offered, not knowing what else to say. "Yes, please," she smiled weakly. "If it's not too much trouble." I retired to the kitchen to put the kettle on and gather my thoughts. What would my son's fiancée be doing in my house at 9 o'clock at night on their wedding day? What happened after I left? When I returned with 2 cups of tea, I saw Hazel sitting motionless, looking at Edith's photograph on the mantelpiece. "She was beautiful," Hazel said, taking the cup. "She had a kind face." "Yes." I sat down across from her. "Edith was the kindest person I ever knew." We were silent for a while, sipping our tea. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. "Hazel, what's wrong? Why are you here?" She set her cup down and looked at me straight on. "I postponed the wedding," she said. "Or rather, the reception and the wedding trip. Technically, we're probably already married. The ceremony has already taken place. But I told Quentin that I needed time to think before we started living as husband and wife." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me was glad she hadn't thrown herself blindly into this marriage after everything she'd learned. The other part felt guilty that I was the cause of her confusion. "How did he react?" I asked. "Angry at first," she lowered her gaze. "Screamed that you were making it all up, that it was revenge, that you'd always hated him. Then, when he realized I was serious about postponing the honeymoon, he started begging, promised he'd explain everything, that there were 2 sides to everything." "That's true," I said. "There are 2 sides to everything. That's why I'm here." She looked at me again. "I want to hear the whole story, not the scraps shouted out in anger at the wedding, but the full picture. I have a right to know who I married." I sighed. She was right. She deserved to know the truth, the whole truth, not just the part I spewed out in a moment of anger. "What do you want to hear?" "Everything," she said firmly. "From the very beginning. What was he like as a child? When did you notice problems? What happened to his first wife? Is it true what you said about the money for Edith's treatment?" I gathered my thoughts. This was going to be a long story, and I wanted to be as fair as possible. "Quentin was a late baby," I began. Edith and I had been unable to have children for a long time, had almost given up hope. When he was born, we were already over 35. Edith idolized him, the long-awaited son, our little miracle. I was probably more reserved in showing my feelings, but I loved him with all my heart, too. I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. As a child, he was smart, but complicated. Learned very early on to get his way through manipulation. If Edith wouldn't let him do something, he'd come to me with a different version of the story. If I was strict, he went to his mother to complain that I didn't understand him. We tried to be consistent, but it didn't always work. Hazel listened intently without interrupting. At school, his problems weren't academic. He was always capable, but behavioral. He didn't know how to admit his mistakes. Always found someone to blame, a teacher who picked on him, classmates who set him up, circumstances that got in the way. Edith and I took him to a psychologist when he was 12. He said Quentin had problems with empathy and accepting responsibility, but that it could be corrected with the right upbringing. And you tried? Of course, I grinned bitterly. Edith was gentler, always looking for compromises. I was stricter, insisting on consequences. Maybe that's what created the rift. He saw his mother as an ally and me as an eternal critic. But I just wanted him to grow up to be a responsible person. I saw where that character trait leads, blaming everyone around you but never yourself. I told her about Quentin's teenage years, how he began to lie in more sophisticated ways, how he learned to look remorseful without feeling real remorse, how he masterfully manipulated the feelings of others. When he went to college, Edith and I hoped that independent living would change him. To some extent it did. He became more strategic, no longer throwing tantrums when things didn't go according to his plan, but just finding workarounds. He learned to be charming when he needed to be. People were drawn to him. He knew how to make a good first impression. Yes, Hazel said quietly. That's true. I continued the story about how Quentin graduated from college, how he got his first job, how quickly he moved up the career ladder. He's always been ambitious, I said. And that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But the methods by which he accomplished his goals. I've heard various stories from his colleagues, from mutual acquaintances, about how he appropriated other people's ideas, how he framed his competitors, how he flattered his superiors. What about his first marriage? Hazel asked. He told me that his ex-wife was a complicated person, that she cheated on him. I shook my head. Maria wasn't perfect, but she didn't cheat on him. He was the one who had an affair with the receptionist in his office. Maria found out about it by accident. She saw the messages on his phone. When she confronted him, he denied everything, accused her of paranoia, of jealousy, got to the point where she started to question her sanity. Gaslighting, Hazel whispered. What? Gaslighting is when a person causes another to doubt their own perception of reality. It's a form of psychological abuse. I nodded. Yeah, it sounds like it. Eventually, Maria hired a private investigator who provided evidence of infidelity. Quentin then changed tactics, admitted the affair but blamed Maria. I think it was her who drove him to his coldness, her constant complaints. He even tried to convince us that Maria was a terrible wife. And you believed it? No, I shook my head. Edith and I knew Maria well. She was a kind, caring woman, maybe a little insecure, which made her the perfect target for Quentin's manipulations. We supported her through the divorce as best we could. Edith even testified in court in her favor regarding custody of Frederick. Your grandson, Hazel nodded. Quentin rarely speaks of him. No wonder. I felt an old ache rising inside. Since the divorce, Quentin had been virtually absent from his son's life. At first there were excuses: work, stress, the new apartment too small for the baby. Then Maria remarried and moved to another state. Quentin used that as an excuse to distance himself even more. He didn't pay child support until after the court order, and even then not regularly. And you? Have you been in contact with your grandson? We tried, I sighed. For the first few years after they moved out, Edith and I traveled to see them twice a year, sent holiday gifts, made phone calls. But as Frederick got older, he became distant. I think it was too painful for him to keep in touch with us when his own father ignored him. In recent years, we've only exchanged cards at Christmas. I'm not even sure if he'll come to my funeral. Hazel looked at me with such sympathy that I felt a lump in my throat. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at me like that, with understanding, without judgment. "And the story about the treatment money?" she asked quietly. "Is that true too?" I nodded, feeling the anger I'd felt when I'd learned of my son's deed return. Yes, when Edith was diagnosed with cancer, we found out about a clinic in Switzerland that was doing an experimental treatment with good results. Insurance didn't cover it, so we had to pay for it ourselves. We sold the second car. I took extra shifts in the warehouse despite my age. Collected $30,000, almost all we had. I paused, remembering those hard days. Quentin was around then for the first time in a long time. Came by more often, helped with the paperwork, with organizing the trip. He said he had connections at an international bank that he could open a special account to transfer money to Switzerland. We entrusted him with the money, in cash, because I always kept my savings at home. He had to deposit it into the account, get all the necessary paperwork for the clinic. I felt my hands shaking and set the cup aside. A month later, when it came time to prepay the clinic, the money was gone. Quentin said he'd put it into some investment scheme that was supposed to triple the amount in a short period of time. Of course, it turned out to be fraudulent. Or, more likely, there was no scheme and he just took the money for himself. He was having financial problems at the time after his divorce. Hazel covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "How could he?" "I think he convinced himself he was doing it for Edith's good," I said, trying to be fair. "That if we could triple the amount, we could pay for longer treatment, better facilities." Quentin had always been a master of self-deception, but it didn't change the result. We lost the money, and with it the chance for experimental treatment. Edith had to make do with what the insurance covered. And she knew about what Quentin had done with the money. No, I shook my head. I couldn't tell her. She was so weak by then, and she had so much faith in her son. I told her that the clinic had changed their mind, that her case didn't fit their program. That was the only time I lied to her. We sat in silence. Hazel stared into the space in front of her, processing everything she had heard. I felt devastated after that long story, but also strangely liberated. For the first time in years, I told the whole story without softening the angles, without excusing my son out of a sense of obligation. "You know," Hazel finally said, "Quentin lied to me too. Not on that scale, but there were things that didn't add up, stories that changed over time. I chalked it up to bad memory, stress, but maybe I just didn't want to see the truth." "We all don't want to see the truth sometimes," I replied, "especially about the people we love." "Yeah," she smiled weakly. "When we started dating, he was so attentive, so caring. Said I changed his life, that he wanted to be better with me. And I believed it because I wanted to believe it. Because when Quentin turns on his charm, it's hard not to give in." I nodded. Quentin always had a knack for being charming when he wanted to get something. It was a quality that helped him in his career, in relationships, in manipulation. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Hazel sighed. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to believe that he's changed, that he'll be different with me. We go to therapy, and sometimes I see glimmers of real remorse, real understanding. But now, knowing the whole story, I'm not sure I can trust him." "I can't tell you what to do," I said. "And I don't want to influence your decision. I've just told you what I know, what I've seen for myself. Maybe Quentin really has changed. People do change sometimes. But you don't believe that. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I wondered, did I believe my son could have changed? After all these years, all the disappointments, all the repetitive patterns of behavior. I'd like to believe, I answered honestly. But no, I don't. Not without a serious shock that would make him really look at himself and his actions. And Quentin has always been a master at avoiding such self-judgment. Hazel nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. Thank you for your honesty. And for the tea. I have to go. I'm staying with a friend. She's waiting. We stood up. At the door, Hazel turned to me. You know what the saddest thing is? I still love him, despite everything I've learned. It's so stupid. No, I shook my head. It's not stupid. I still love him too. He's my son, no matter what. It's just, love doesn't always mean sticking around. Sometimes loving means letting go. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Good night, Mr. Thorne. Good night, Hazel. I watched her walk toward the cab waiting at the curb. Her white dress glowed ghostly in the darkness. She didn't look back. Back at the house, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if the years of weight I had carried on my shoulders had become a little lighter. I didn't know what Hazel would decide. I didn't know if I would ever see my son again, but I knew I had done the right thing by telling the truth. First at the wedding and then more fully and discreetly tonight. Maybe the truth really is liberating. Not from pain, not from the consequences of past mistakes, but from having to pretend everything is okay when it isn't. I looked at Edith's picture. I hope you'd approve, I said quietly. I hope you'd understand. In the silence of the house, I thought I heard her reply, Of course, Beryl. You did what you had to do. Autumn in Shoreview has always been my favorite time of year. The leaves of the maples outside were turning gold and purple. The air was clear and fresh, and the sun, no longer as hot as it was in the summer, lit up my garden. Edith loved this season, collecting leaves for herbariums, making apple jam, decorating the house with little pumpkins and dried bouquets. 3 months have passed since the day I ruined my son's wedding. 3 months of silence, reflection, and gradual acceptance that some relationships can't be saved no matter how hard you try. I continued to live my measured life as a pensioner, working in the garden, going to meetings of the chess club at the local library, occasionally going to the swimming pool. My neighbor Veronica still dropped by with homemade baked goods and local news. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But inside I felt a change, as if the heavy door I'd kept closed for years had finally opened, letting in fresh air. I hadn't heard from Quentin. After Hazel's visit on the day of the failed wedding, neither of them had contacted me. I didn't know what she decided, whether they stayed together or broke up. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about her, hoping she had found the strength to make the right choice, whatever it was. The day everything changed, I was checking the mail after breakfast as usual. Among the sales brochures and bills lay an envelope that immediately caught my eye. A return address from Portland, Oregon. I didn't know anyone in Portland. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was neat, but with a distinctive slant that seemed vaguely familiar. Dear Grandpa Beryl, the letter began, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Grandfather? It could only be Frederick, Quentin's son, my grandson, whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. I'm not sure if you remember me. We haven't seen each other since I was 10. I'm 23 now, living in Portland and in my last year of college, studying environmental science. I'm writing because I was recently contacted by a woman named Hazel Pratt. She told me about what happened at her wedding to my father, about what you said, and what happened afterward. I don't know if you know this, but they didn't get married. Hazel told me that after the night she came to see you, she started gathering information, checking facts. She contacted my mom, my dad's former co-workers, even found the nurse who took care of Grandma Edith in her last days. And everything you've told me checks out. When she presented her father with all the evidence, he first denied it, then accused her of betrayal, then begged her to give him another chance. But Hazel was adamant. She gave him the ring back and moved out of their shared apartment. Dad, of course, blames you for everything. He called Mom, for the first time in years, and said a lot of mean things about you. But Mom didn't believe it. She always told me that you and Grandma Edith were the only ones who supported her during the divorce. I'm writing because I want to get to know you. I want to hear your version of our family story, not the one distorted by my father, not the one softened by my mother. I want to understand where I come from, whose blood runs in my veins. If it's okay with you, I'd like to come to Shoreview over fall break. I'll be in town from October 20th through the 27th. My phone number and email are at the bottom of the letter. Looking forward to meeting you, your grandson Frederick. I reread the letter 3 times, not believing my eyes. Frederick, my grandson. He wants to see me. And Hazel. Hazel broke off her engagement to Quentin. She checked the facts, found the evidence, and made her choice. A strange feeling filled me, not triumph, not gloating, but quiet relief. So the truth did matter after all. It was not for nothing that I had broken my silence, not for nothing that I had risked appearing like a vindictive old man spoiling my own son's wedding. I didn't know what to make of Frederick's letter. Part of me immediately wanted to call him, to hear his voice, but the other part was afraid. What if he was like his father? What if this meeting would only bring more pain? I decided to consult Veronica, my neighbor who had become something of a friend over the years. She was a widow, like me, and had 2 grown children and 5 grandchildren with whom she maintained a warm relationship. That evening I stopped by her house with a bottle of wine. I didn't drink myself because of my medication, but I knew Veronica loved a glass of good red, and told her about the letter. "Of course you must meet him," she exclaimed after hearing the story. "That's your grandson, and judging from the letter, he doesn't look at all like his father." "How do you know?" I asked doubtfully. "Beryl, well, think about it." She looked at me over her glasses. "The guy is studying to be an ecologist. Was Quentin ever interested in anything other than money and status? Besides, the boy grew up with Maria, not him, and most importantly, he seeks out a meeting with you on his own, knowing his father is dead set against it. That takes character and an opinion of your own." Her words made sense. I looked at the letter I still held in my hands. What if he's disappointed? It's not like I'm some prominent person, just an old man, a former warehouse manager. Veronica snorted. "Don't be puffed up, Beryl Thorne. You're an honest, principled man who always did the right thing, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Your grandson can be proud of a grandfather like that." Her words gave me confidence. When I got home, I immediately sat down to write a reply to Frederick. The letter was awkward. I had never been good at expressing my feelings on paper, but I tried to be sincere. I wrote that I would be glad to meet him, that I could show him Shoreview, tell him about his grandmother Edith, about what his father was like as a child. I gave my address and phone number and signed, "Looking forward to meeting you, your grandfather Beryl." I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange state of anticipation and anxiety. I prepared the house for my guest arrival. For the first time in a long time, I thoroughly cleaned the guest room, dusted off photo albums I hadn't opened in years. He found a box of Quentin's old toys that Edith had saved. Frederick was old enough for them, of course, but he might be interested to see what his father had played with. At last, the 20th of October came. We arranged for me to meet Frederick at the bus station in downtown Shoreview. I arrived a half hour before the bus arrived, nervously pacing the small waiting room. How would I recognize him? It's been 13 years. He was a child the last time I saw him, now a grown man. The bus arrived right on schedule. I stood at the exit looking at the faces of the passengers getting off. Suddenly I saw him, A tall young man with a backpack over his shoulders and an uncertain smile. He had my eyes, blue, clear, and Maria's brown hair. But the smile was Edith's, just as warm and open. "Grandpa Beryl?" he asked, walking over to me. I nodded, unable to utter a word with excitement. "I'm Frederick." He held out his hand, but then, as if changing his mind, just hugged me. "I'm so glad to finally meet you." The hug was awkward. We were both unaccustomed to such intimacy with a near stranger, but at the same time, there was something right, natural about it. Blood calls for blood, as Edith used to say. We drove to my house. On the way, Frederick talked about his studies, about the coastal ecosystem restoration project he was doing. I listened, furtively scrutinizing his profile. Quentin's features showed in the line of his chin, in the shape of his nose, but his expression was different, open, sincere, without the wariness my son had always had. At home, I showed him the guest room where he would be staying this week. He set down his backpack and went straight to the pictures on the dresser. "Is that Grandma Edith?" he asked, pointing to a picture of my wife and I standing by the lake, young and happy. "Yes, that was our 10th wedding anniversary, a trip to Lake Tahoe." "She's beautiful," Frederick said with a touch of sadness. "It's a shame I don't remember much of her. Only vague images, the smell of cookies, laughter, soft hands." "She loved you very much," I said. "Always said you were a special kid, sensitive, attentive beyond your years." Frederick smiled. "Really? My father always said I was a difficult child, capricious, whiny." I shook my head. "That's not true. You were a calm little kid, just very inquisitive, always asking questions, wanting to know how the world worked." We went down to the kitchen where I made a simple dinner, pasta and sauce from Edith's recipe. Over the meal, Frederick told me about his life after he and Maria moved away, about how his mom had remarried to a nice man named Stephen, who had replaced his father, about school, about friends, about first love and first disappointment, about how he found his calling in ecology, volunteering at a nature reserve. "What about your father?" I asked cautiously. "Do you keep in touch?" Frederick grimaced. "Not really. He calls on his birthday, sometimes sends money for Christmas. I went to see him a couple of times over summer vacation, but it was always tense. He didn't know what to talk to me about, and I felt like a burden." I nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. "After that phone call when he scolded you, I decided to figure things out on my own," Frederick continued. "Talked to my mom, and she told her version of their divorce. Then I found Hazel through social networks. She was very open, ready to explain everything, and gradually the picture came together." I listened without interrupting. My grandson spoke confidently, measuredly, like someone who had given a lot of thought to what he was saying. "You know what surprised me the most?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Not that my father was lying or manipulative. I'd suspected that before. It's that despite all that, you and Mom still talk about him without hatred, without a desire for revenge or to blacken him in my eyes." I wondered. He was right. I had never hated Quentin, been disappointed, angry, hurt, but not hated. "He's my son," I said simply. "No matter what. And your father, no matter what happens, that's a fact you can't change. You can only accept it and move on." Frederick nodded. "That's exactly what my mother said, in almost exactly the same words. I think I understand now who my father gets his stubbornness from," he smiled. "Only he doesn't use it the way you do." After dinner, we sat in the living room drinking tea and looking at old photo albums. I showed Frederick pictures of Quentin as a child, told stories, not just the bad ones, but the good ones as well. About how Quentin won the school math Olympiad, how he built a birdhouse for a biology project, crooked, but made with his own hands, how he once defended a neighborhood boy from bullies, even though he was younger and weaker himself. He wasn't always like that, I said, closing the album. There was good in him, too. It's just that somewhere along the way he made a bad choice, and then another, and then another, and each choice took him further and further away from the man he could have been. Frederick looked wistfully at the last picture, Quentin at graduation, young, handsome, with an ambitious smile. I've always been afraid I'd become like that, he admitted quietly, that it was in my blood, the selfishness, the manipulation, the inability to love truly. No, I put my hand on his shoulder. What's in our blood is only a predisposition. The choice is always ours, and from what I can see, you made the right choice. He smiled, and in his smile I saw Edith again. We spent the next few days getting to know each other. I showed him Shoreview, places connected to our family's history, the house where Quentin grew up, the school he attended, the warehouse where I worked for 40 years. We went to Edith's grave, and Frederick placed a bouquet of her favorite chrysanthemums on the headstone. We talked about his plans for the future, his master's degree, his work in the environmental field, a girl named Lisa whom he had been dating for 2 years. He showed me pictures on his phone, and I saw in his eyes the same expression with which Quentin had once looked at Maria: love, tenderness, respect. But unlike Quentin, Frederick seemed to appreciate these feelings, to understand their fragility and importance. On the last evening before he left, we sat on the veranda, enjoying the warm fall evening. Frederick gazed wistfully at the sunset, then turned to me. "Grandpa, I want you to know that I'll be coming over. Not just now, on vacation, but later, on a regular basis. We've lost so much time, I don't want to lose any more." I felt a lump come up to my throat. "I'd be very happy to," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This house is always open to you. And also," he paused, "I'd like you to meet Lisa. Maybe over winter break we could visit together, if you don't mind, of course." "Of course I don't mind," I smiled. "I'd love to meet the girl who makes my grandson happy." We sat in silence, watching the last rays of the sun color the sky pink and gold. I thought about how strangely life works, about how a loss can turn out to be a find, how the end of one chapter can be the beginning of another, better one. Quentin was still my son, and I still loved him. That complicated, painful love that doesn't fade despite disappointments and hurt. But now I knew I could live without the constant worry about him, without the guilt of his choices, without the bitterness of his rejection. Now I had Frederick, a grandson who sought a connection to me, who wanted to know his roots, who seemed to have inherited the best of our family. And maybe through him the thorn line would continue after all, not just in the genes, but in the values that Edith and I had always considered important: honesty, responsibility, the ability to love not for one's own sake, but for the sake of another. "You know," I said, looking out at the sunset, "your grandmother Edith always said that there is no darkness that can't be dispelled by light, even the smallest ray." Frederick nodded. "A beautiful thought, and true."